What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show expecting a pleasant conversation, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to tear him down on live television? In just 34 seconds, Lorraine Kelly went from greeting her guest with a smile to making a comment so outrageous that it would lead to the most shocking walkout in daytime TV history. The morning started like any other on the Lorraine Kelly show. The studio audience settled into their seats, the cameras positioned perfectly, the lighting adjusted just right. George Clooney was scheduled as the main guest, there to discuss his latest film and his humanitarian work. Everyone expected the usual charm, the easy laughter, the kind of interview that makes for perfect morning television. George walked onto the set with his trademark smile, waving to the audience as they applauded. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, just classic and elegant. Lorraine stood from her chair to greet him, her smile wide and welcoming. They shook hands and George took his seat on the famous couch. "George Clooney, welcome to the show," Lorraine said, her voice carrying that practiced cheerfulness that daytime hosts perfect over years. "Thank you for having me. It's great to be here," George replied, settling into the cushions. The first few minutes went smoothly. They talked about the weather, about George's flight into the country, small talk that warmed up the conversation. But then, something shifted. You could feel it in the air, like the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. "So George," Lorraine began, leaning forward slightly, "you've been in the business for quite a long time now." "I have, yes. Very fortunate to have had such a long career," George answered, still smiling. "Some might say too long," Lorraine said, and there was an edge to her voice now. The audience went quiet. George's smile faltered just a bit. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?" "Well, you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore, are you? When do you think you'll step aside and let the younger generation have their turn?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the usual banter. George maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened slightly. "I think there's room for everyone in this industry, Lorraine. Age doesn't determine talent or relevance." But Lorraine wasn't finished. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at George with a look that could only be described as condescending. "Let's talk about your marriage. You were a bachelor for so long, and then suddenly you settled down. Some people say it was a publicity stunt. What do you say to that?" George blinked, clearly taken aback. "I'd say those people don't know what they're talking about. My marriage is private and very real." "But you can understand why people are skeptical," Lorraine pressed on. "A man your age, suddenly marrying someone so accomplished and beautiful. It does seem convenient for your image." "Convenient?" George's voice remained calm, but you could hear the steel underneath. "Lorraine, I'm not sure where you're going with this. I'm just asking the questions everyone wants answered," Lorraine said, waving her hand dismissively. "You can't expect to come on this show and not face some tough questions." "Tough questions are fine," George replied, sitting up straighter. "But questioning the authenticity of my marriage crosses a line." The camera operators glanced at each other. The producers in the control room were likely panicking. This was going off the rails fast. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Lorraine said, actually laughing a little. "This is what interviews are about, getting to the truth." "The truth?" George repeated. "The truth is, I came here to talk about my film and my work with refugees, not to have my personal life attacked." "Attacked is such a strong word," Lorraine said, still smiling the practiced smile. "I'm simply being honest. Someone has to say what everyone's thinking." "And what exactly is everyone thinking?" George asked. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, looking pleased with herself. "That maybe, just maybe, George Clooney isn't the saint everyone thinks he is. That maybe all this charity work and activism is just another performance." The audience gasped. This was beyond uncomfortable now. This was hostile. George stared at her for a long moment. "You think my humanitarian work is a performance? I think actors are very good at acting," Lorraine said, shrugging. "Even off screen. I've spent years working with refugees, raising money for disaster relief, using my platform to shine a light on injustice," George said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To have you sit there and reduce it to a performance is not only insulting to me, it's insulting to every person I've tried to help." "Oh, come on now," Lorraine said, waving her hand again like she was swatting away a fly. "Don't get all high and mighty. You're an actor. You get paid to pretend. How do we know when you're being real?" George looked at her, really looked at her, and you could see the disappointment in his eyes. Not anger, not rage, just pure disappointment. "You know what, Lorraine? I don't think you do want to know when I'm being real. I think you invited me here to create drama, to get a reaction, to boost your ratings, and I'm not going to play that game. So you're saying I'm lying? Lorraine's voice rose slightly. I'm the host of this show, George. I decide what we talk about. And I decide whether I participate, George said quietly. What's that supposed to mean? Lorraine asked, her smile finally fading. It means, George said, standing up slowly, that I'm done here. The studio went completely silent. You could hear the buzz of the overhead lights, the quiet hum of the cameras. Nobody moved. You can't just leave, Lorraine said, and for the first time she looked uncertain. We're in the middle of an interview. No, George said, removing his microphone and placing it carefully on the couch. You're in the middle of an ambush. I'm in the middle of leaving. This is ridiculous, Lorraine said, standing up now too. I was just doing my job. Your job is to interview guests, not insult them, George replied. There's a difference between asking hard questions and being deliberately cruel. You crossed that line multiple times. I'm not being cruel, Lorraine protested, but her voice had lost its confidence. I'm being real. Real? George shook his head. Real would have been having an honest conversation. What you did was try to tear me down for entertainment. That's not journalism, Lorraine. That's just mean. The audience remained frozen. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others looked angry. A few were filming on their phones. If you walk off this set, everyone will think you have something to hide, Lorraine said, trying one last time to regain control. George turned to face her fully. Let them think what they want. I know who I am. I know what I've done and why I've done it. I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. So that's it then? Lorraine asked. You're just going to run away? I'm not running, George said calmly. I'm choosing not to engage with someone who clearly has no interest in having a respectful conversation. He started walking toward the edge of the stage. The camera followed him. George, wait, Lorraine called out, and now she sounded almost desperate. Can we just start over? Maybe I came on a bit strong. George paused and turned back. A bit strong? Lorraine, you questioned my marriage, my integrity, and my life's work, all in the span of a few minutes. That's not strong. That's hostile. I was trying to make good television, Lorraine said weakly. At whose expense? George asked. Mine? Because I'm the one standing here, being told that everything I care about is fake. How is that good television? Lorraine opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. You know what makes good television? George continued. Real conversations, honest exchanges, treating your guests with basic human respect, none of which happened here today. I have a job to do, Lorraine said, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. So do I, George replied, and part of my job is knowing when to walk away from something that isn't right. This isn't right, Lorraine. The producer's voice could be heard faintly through someone's earpiece, probably telling them to cut to commercial, but nobody moved. Everyone wanted to see how this would end. You're making a big mistake, Lorraine said, trying to sound authoritative again, walking off my show. The only mistake I made was thinking this would be a normal interview, George said. I should have known better when I saw how you treated your last few guests. What's that supposed to mean? Lorraine demanded. It means you have a pattern, George said simply. You invite people on, you act friendly, and then you go for the throat. I've heard the stories. I just didn't think you'd be foolish enough to try it with me. I'm not foolish, Lorraine snapped. Then what do you call this? George gestured around the studio. You've created a hostile environment, insulted your guest, and now you're upset that there are consequences. That seems pretty foolish to me. A few people in the audience actually nodded. The tide was clearly turning. My audience loves me, Lorraine said, looking out at the crowd. Right? We're just having fun here. But the audience stayed quiet. Nobody wanted to agree with her, not after what they'd witnessed. Lorraine, can I give you some advice? George asked, his tone softening just a little. I don't need advice from you, Lorraine said stiffly. Maybe not, George agreed. But I'm going to say it anyway. Being a good host isn't about being the star. It's about making your guests feel comfortable enough to be themselves. It's about listening, really listening, and finding the interesting stories, not creating fake drama. My ratings are just fine, thank you very much, Lorraine replied defensively. Ratings aren't everything, George said. Your reputation is. And right now, you're building a reputation for being difficult and disrespectful. Is that really what you want? Lorraine looked like she wanted to argue, but something in George's expression stopped her. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice, the genuine concern. He wasn't attacking her, even after everything she'd said. He was trying to help her understand. "I just want to do a good show," Lorraine said quietly, and for a moment the mask slipped. She looked tired. "Then do a good show," George said gently. "But do it with integrity. Don't sacrifice your humanity for a few extra viewers." The studio remained silent. This had gone from a disaster to something almost profound. George had every right to storm off angry, to slam doors and curse. Instead, he was standing there, trying to teach a lesson to someone who had just spent 10 minutes attacking him. "I don't know what to say," Lorraine admitted. "You don't have to say anything," George replied. "Just think about it. Think about the kind of show you want to have, the kind of host you want to be." He turned to leave again, and this time, Lorraine didn't try to stop him. She just stood there, watching him walk away. "George," someone from the audience called out. "We love you." George turned and smiled, giving a small wave. "Thank you. That means a lot." More people started clapping. Then more. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding him. Not because he was famous, but because he had handled an impossible situation with grace and dignity. Lorraine watched this happen, her face unreadable. The applause wasn't for her. It was for the man she'd just tried to humiliate. George reached the edge of the stage and paused one more time. He looked back at Lorraine, and their eyes met across the distance. "Good luck, Lorraine," he said sincerely. "I hope you figure it out." And then he was gone, disappearing behind the curtain. The audience kept clapping. Some were cheering now. The cameras didn't know where to point. Lorraine slowly sat back down in her chair. She looked lost, like she couldn't quite process what had just happened. The producer was definitely yelling in everyone's earpieces now, trying to salvage something from this mess. "Well," Lorraine said to the cameras, her voice shaky, "that was unexpected." But nobody was listening to her anymore. The audience was still talking about George, about how calm he'd been, how respectful, about how he could have destroyed her with words but chose not to, about how he'd walked away instead of fighting back. One of the cameras caught a glimpse of George in the hallway, being met by his assistant. He was saying something, probably explaining what happened. He didn't look angry or upset. He just looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted. Back in the studio, Lorraine was trying to continue the show. "Let's go to commercial," she said weakly. The red light on the cameras went off. The moment the show cut away, Lorraine put her head in her hands. The studio audience was buzzing with conversation, everyone sharing their thoughts on what they'd just witnessed. "Did you see how calm he was?" One woman said to her friend. "I can't believe she said those things," another person replied. "He handled that perfectly," someone else chimed in. The crew was moving around, adjusting things for the next segment, but everyone was distracted. This was the kind of moment that would be talked about for years. The day George Clooney walked off Lorraine Kelly's show, not in anger, but in dignity. Lorraine sat in her chair, still not moving. Her makeup artist approached hesitantly, offering to touch up her face, but Lorraine waved her away. She stared at the empty couch where George had been sitting just minutes before. The floor manager approached. "We're back in 2 minutes. What do you want to do?" "I don't know," Lorraine said honestly. "I really don't know." "We could bring out the next guest early," the floor manager suggested. "No," Lorraine said. "I need to say something to the audience." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" the floor manager asked carefully. "Probably not," Lorraine admitted, "but I have to try." The 2 minutes passed too quickly. The red light came back on. Lorraine straightened up, took a deep breath, and looked into the camera. "I think I owe everyone an apology," she began. "That didn't go the way I planned." The audience watched her carefully, waiting to see if this was genuine or just more performance. "I thought I was asking tough questions," Lorraine continued. "But watching George walk away, seeing your reactions, I realized I crossed a line. Several lines, actually." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've been doing this show for a long time. Sometimes I forget that my guests are real people with real feelings. I got caught up in trying to create a moment, and I lost sight of basic respect." The audience remained quiet, listening. George Clooney came here today to talk about his work, and instead of giving him that platform, I attacked him personally. That wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And I'm sorry. It was a start. Not enough to fix what had happened, but a start. "I don't know if George is watching this," Lorraine said, looking directly at the camera. "But if you are, I truly am sorry. You deserve better." The audience started clapping, but it was different from before. Softer, more uncertain. They appreciated the apology, but the damage was done. Lorraine tried to continue with the show, bringing out her next guest, going through the motions. But everything felt hollow now. The energy was gone. The magic of live television had been replaced by awkward tension. Behind the scenes, the story was already spreading. Production assistants were texting friends, camera operators were sharing what they'd seen. Within the hour, it would be all over social media. By the end of the day, it would be international news. George Clooney, meanwhile, had left the building. He was in a car heading back to his hotel, looking out the window at the city passing by. His assistant was on the phone, fielding calls from his publicist, his manager, everyone wanting to know what happened. "It's fine," George said calmly. "These things happen." "But she was so out of line," his assistant protested. "She was," George agreed, "but getting angry about it won't change anything. I said what I needed to say, and I left. That's all I could do." "You were incredible in there," his assistant said. "So calm." "I've been in this business long enough to know that losing your temper only makes things worse," George replied. "Besides, she's clearly struggling with something. Maybe this will be a wake-up call." His phone was buzzing constantly with messages of support from friends and colleagues who'd already heard about the incident. George glanced at a few but didn't respond. He'd deal with it all later. Back at the studio, the show finally ended. Lorraine sat in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. Her producer knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Sure," Lorraine said tiredly. He entered and closed the door behind him. "That was rough out there." "I know," Lorraine said. "I really messed up." "Why did you go after him like that?" the producer asked. "That's not like you." "I don't know," Lorraine admitted. "I thought I was being edgy, provocative. I thought people would love it." "People love authenticity," the producer said gently. "Not cruelty." George said something similar. Lorraine remembered. Right before he left. "He's right," the producer said. "We need to rethink how we're doing these interviews." Lorraine nodded slowly. "I think I need to take some time, figure out what kind of show I want to have, what kind of host I want to be. That's probably a good idea," the producer agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing what had happened. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Lorraine asked quietly. "Honestly," the producer said, "probably not. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is learning from this and doing better next time." Lorraine looked at her reflection again. "I used to love this job. When did it become about creating drama instead of having conversations?" "I don't know," the producer said, "but maybe today is the day we change that." The story of what happened in that studio would be analyzed and discussed for a long time. Some would say George was right to walk away. Others would argue he should have stayed and fought back. But everyone would agree on one thing: he handled it with more grace than most people could have managed. In a world where drama and conflict often win ratings, George Clooney showed that there's still power and dignity in knowing when to speak and when to walk away, in treating others with respect, even when they don't deserve it. And Lorraine Kelly learned, perhaps too late, that being a good host isn't about creating moments. It's about creating space for genuine connection, something she'd forgotten in her pursuit of entertainment. The cameras had stopped rolling. The audience had gone home. The studio lights were turned off. But the impact of those 34 seconds, those words that went too far, would echo for much longer. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in something that's wrong. And that's exactly what George Clooney did.